Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I'm coming to you today with a brief discussion of a few newish books specifically about lesbians and other women-oriented women in literary history. I'm hoping to read at least a couple of these books during Pride Month. I'm wearing sort of a lavender headscarf in honor of the quote lavender ladies of these books. If you're young, you might not know that before the rainbow flag became a symbol of gay pride, lavender was a color used to indicate gay identity and resistance. During Stonewall, for example, protesters of all identities wore lavender sashes and armbands to express their resistance. Over time, lavender began to refer more specifically to women, to lesbian identity. In fact, feminist Betty Friedan was so afraid that lesbians would tarnish the image of the women's movement in its early days that she referred to lesbianism as the lavender menace. Some of the people I'm going to mention in this video did not use the word lesbian to describe themselves, and some of the people who did use the word might not use it now, perhaps preferring words like queer or non-binary. Nevertheless, because the label was in common usage at the time in communities of women-oriented women, I'll be using it throughout this video. After I read the books, I may have a better idea of whether it is really an appropriate usage in these cases, but for now, that's what I'll do. The first book I want to mention was published in 2020 in the UK, but it's a brand new release in the United States. Diana Suhami's No Modernism Without Lesbians. Suhami looks at a group of women, 3 of whom were American and 1 British, who rejected the patriarchy and made lives of their own along with other women, all choosing to live in Paris in the first half of the 20th century. One was the innovative publisher Sylvia Beach, another a patron of artists called Briar, who was the poet H.D.'s lover, a third, a society hostess, Natalie Barney, and the fourth, the groundbreaking writer, Gertrude Stein. The author of this book looks at each of the women in separate chapters, but also the collective of the 4, an approach to group biography as comprehensive cultural history, which I've enjoyed very much in other books. Suhami argues that these women and others who lived outside the boundaries of, quote, the normal rules were able to envision art and society with a new kind of creativity and openness. And their independence from men, that is, their existence in a life where they could avoid the most personal and daily aspects of patriarchal control, allowed them to change not only their own lives, but to participate and sometimes spearhead much of the changing culture of the 20th century. I want to share the dedication Suhami makes at the beginning of her book to LGBTQIAPD, or Quilt Bag Plus, or whatever gets you the light. I love this. Key is the idea of respect for whatever terms particular people embrace, for the identity, but also for the collective or the umbrella group. Personally, I'm rather fond of the term queer as a way of referring to all people who define themselves in the sex or gender minority, but not everyone who uses the label queer accepts that meaning, and not everyone who identifies in that larger grouping likes the word. Instead of the inclusive but long and unpronounceable LGBTQ, etc. listing of initials, Suhami shares this alternate phrase, not at all uncommon in women's communities. Quilt bag is just a reordering of the letters, more or less, but it's pronounceable. It appeals to women specifically, or at least older women, because of its embrace of a word historically identified with women's lives and women's culture, the world of craft. Of course, as I suspect Suhami might say, lesbian is only one pocket in or patch on the quilt bag. Quilt bag is a whole, but it's made up of a variety of different elements. Down in the description box, I'll list all the elements mentioned. Although Suhami and many other people who use this term absolutely mean it with deep respect and love, there are, of course, people who use the term in a derogatory fashion. Of course. that is true of gay and queer and everything else, too. Two very brief personal stories. When I was in college back in the 1980s, some of my nerdy gay and lesbian friends started an improv comedy group, which they called Glib. I don't actually remember if the I was supposed to stand for intersex or for something else, or just as the vowel to make it pronounceable. And then when I was in graduate school, I remember a great conversation over Hanukkah candles and latkes about renaming the Jewish gay and lesbian group Bagel. Anyone else have any respectful but clever names for the collective? Share them in the comments. Well, anyway, the second book I want to mention in this Pride Month potential TBR is another brand new release, although it's not a new book, a new edition of the Alice B. Toklas cookbook. Toklas was Gertrude Stein's partner. It's been a while since I've read this narrative book with recipes, sort of a memoir in food, but I'm eager to dip back in. The foreword to the edition I owned before was by food writer extraordinaire MFK Fisher, and this version adds in a new introduction by Ruth Reichl. And while I'm talking about Toklas, let me pull out this gorgeous illustrated edition, published last year, of Gertrude Stein's The Autobiography of Alice B. Toklas. I talked about it last year and showed some of the stunning pictures, and I'll try to remember to link to that video below. And then finally, a book not about lesbianism, although some of the women mentioned in the book were lesbians. Mo Moulton's study of Dorothy Sayers and the women she surrounded herself with from very early in the 20th century and then throughout her life. The book is called The Mutual Admiration Society, and I'm including it here in this Pride listing because fundamentally it's a book about women loving women, not always in a sexual way, but in a deeply committed way outside of the male-dominated society. The book was released in late 2019, I think, but although I poked around in it a bit, I've still not read all of it. This study also fits into Pride Month because of its non-binary author, Mo Moulton. Like Suhami's No Modernism Without Lesbians, the Mutual Admiration Society is something of a cross between collective biography and a socio-cultural history of women's experiences during the early part of the 20th century. Well, that's it for today. I am about to head off to see my mother, who will be hospitalized again this week. So don't be shocked if I continue to be a terrible booktuber as far as responding to comments here and making comments on your videos. This time I have recorded another video or two, which I will schedule for release later in the week. So I won't be disappearing completely. Thanks for your patience, of course, but also thanks for all the love and support so many of you have sent. This is a special place. Take care. See you soon here on Hannah's Books.